Junto com quem somos e de onde viemos, outra pergunta alimenta a curiosidade da humanidade desde sempre. Para onde vamos? Então, o mais importante do que saber se existe vida após a morte é saber o que existirá amanhã, depois de amanhã, daqui a 10 anos ou 50, naquilo que se convencionou chamar de futuro. E não falta, nunca faltou, gente tentando prever o futuro, mesmo que essas previsões ou adivinhações tivessem quase sempre que ser adaptadas. E para além do misticismo e das artes, o questionamento invadiu o campo das pesquisas faz tempo. E o futurólogo é um estudioso que tenta desenhar o que não conhecemos a partir das informações que já temos. Gente como o dinamarquês Peter Kronström, que trabalha no Brasil, no braço latino-americano do Instituto Copenhagen para Estudos Futuros. Ele falou ao Milênio sobre algumas das tendências dessa realidade em construção. E o futuro é esse mistério que vai sendo revelado e construído dia a dia. Para tentar entender um pouquinho melhor, é que o Peter Kronström está aqui com a gente. Thank you very much, Peter, for this interview. And I'd like to start asking you a very broad question, which is, we know a bit about our past, we try to understand our present and what we're doing with it, but the future is really unknown. Why did you choose to study the future?
Well, there's many good explanations, but to make a short answer, I think the future is a really fascinating place. And we spend, as human beings, we spend about 85% of the time we're awake, we spend about thinking about the future, all of us, in fact. So, and for me, it's about also making sure that we will have a better future maybe, or try to influence, to find out how the future is impacting us today. And basically at the Institute of Copenhagen, we are looking at the future because we believe it's one of the best ways to protect the value we have in society and to avoid unnecessary destruction, so that we can kind of prepare for some of the changes that we see coming in order to make adjustment in good time. No? That's,
and some people tend to think that the future will happen someday. But I've got this impression that the future is happening day by day.
Yeah. No, actually, I always say the future doesn't exist. What exists is actually only this moment, the present. And the future is being constructed in this very moment. No? So what exists about the future, we can say that is not to the present, is an infinite series of possible futures. So actually, many people think the future is like a monster that can change everything, take our jobs, etc. But we really think that the future is not a monster. It's something very sensible that we need to analyze because it's being created in this moment.
Em meio a tantas dúvidas sobre o que será do amanhã, das poucas certezas é o tanto que se errou ontem, prevendo como seria o hoje. Previsões catastróficas do fim da humanidade por doenças ou hecatombe nuclear não se confirmaram. Ao mesmo tempo, não faltam exemplos na história contemporânea das ideias de uma realidade opressiva, uma distopia de pesadelo oposta à utopia dos sonhos, como a que escreveu George Orwell em 1984, com seu Estado totalitário, grande irmão de todos, ou Blade Runner, de Philip K. Dick, com o encontro de máquinas e homens sem final feliz, e que também saiu das páginas de um livro para ganhar as telas dos cinemas. What makes you think that the way you look at the future is more precise than those visions of the past?
Our objective is not necessarily to get it completely right, because no one knows the future. We cannot know the future. So our objective is not to get it completely right, but it's to try and describe, look objectively what is happening, and then how can we imagine this will play out in the future, no? And I agree with you that many unprecise visions about the future has been presented over the past, but actually when you say exactly George Orwell and his work, actually what we see is happening right now in China is a little bit the manifestation of his thoughts. No? So maybe he was not that off for this part of the world with the surveillance societies, that we are going into. But But I think we have 50 years. Our institute is working since '69, so we have 50 years experience on really trying, on a practical way, analyzing statistics, seeing what happened, and then looking forward, and then also all the time trying to figure out really what is going on. Because the big drama with the future is that we always think something will happen in the future, and normally it's always the opposite that happens. You know?
That's true. Peter, Professor Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, the man behind this big event, this big annual event in Davos, Switzerland, is very much into this idea that we are in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, with its blurred differences and borders between human, technological, biological, and other things in the middle of it. Do you think that it's really a revolution that we are in, or is it an ongoing movement that it's unstoppable?
Our analysis shows, we believe that it's more of an ongoing movement that is unstoppable. And actually, but there are some things that we agree a lot with Klaus Schwab. And we launched a report that's called Technology and the Future in 2014 that talks a lot about the same things, because we are seeing, we are looking a lot on mega trends that are impacting the future societies, you know, and we're seeing an acceleration that is really taking technology to a next level in the way we use it. But in fact, we have been using technology ever since the Stone Age, you know, with the first axe, with the first tools.
That was already technology.
That was already technology. And in our vision, new technologies has always had the potential of revolutionizing, and has been revolutionizing ever since the Stone Age was perceived. No? So in our vision, it is an ongoing process. It is not something that is completely new, but maybe right now it is even more, it's perceived as having much more impact, because we are now connected, all of us. And the whole globe is connected at the same time. We know about all the new inventions at the same time at the present. So there is a perception that things are going faster right now and having a more profound impact.
In your view, from what you study, the future of work should be something that would scare us, or something that we should be proud of and wanting to get there because we have plenty of time? And also, do we have today the tools to tell what new jobs will be created in the near future?
Well, to answer the last first, no, we don't have the tools to say, because we cannot even imagine yet what will the jobs be, you know. But what we will see is, we believe that there will always be work, because our history as humankind is one long demonstration that we're very good to make it complicated for ourselves. so we believe that there will always be work. But what we are seeing, and what we will see much more in the future, is what we call structural unemployment. So that means that we will be with a demand for workers that doesn't have to, and we won't have the workforce that has the accurate skills. So there will be some times of adaptations where the workforce has to reinvent itself, has to re-educate itself, and there will be a lot of skills that we are using today that will be obsolete. So there will be some kind of adaptation. But the idea that work will disappear, we don't believe that. We believe that we have the tools and we have the potential to make the work much more enjoyable, that it won't be so much work that finish our bodies and what you call it,
with the robots, with the computers and everything.
Robots, computer and everything, and that probably the work will be much more joyful, and probably the work will be much more linked to our own interest, where we can develop over time, no?
Do you think there is a place in this future that's been built for something like some people defend as a way out of our problems, including the structural lack of jobs and things like that, like the universal minimum wage, which is much discussed right now?
Right now, yeah. We don't believe so much that a minimal, universal minimal, like a citizen salary, we don't believe that that's a very viable way forward. But we believe that there will be a lot of, there's a lot of responsibility on our governments to actually deal with this problem. Because we do see the use of technology and globalization, we do see one of the mega trends that we are analyzing is polarization. that the difference between rich and poor, the difference between well-educated and poor-educated is growing ever more. No? So for the government, in order to curb some of the major problems that we can imagine to happen, government needs to focus much more on education. Never before, due to the vast advance of technology, never before education has been so important, and especially education to understand technology and understand what it's doing to us. So education is extremely important, and extremely important that we move the education to have a way out. But also, we really need to start rethink what we want as a society.
That's true. What's the goal of the economy? What's the goal of society?
Yes.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, you touched the subject, a very important one, I think, which is education. I'd like to go a bit deeper in that.
Yeah.
But we'll do this just in some minutes, just after a short break.
Yeah.
O Milênio volta já já com a continuação da entrevista com Peter Kronström, pegando um tema para lá de complexo, difícil e necessário, a educação. Rapidinho. E o Milênio está de volta hoje entrevistando o Peter Kronström, um dinamarquês que lidera aqui no Brasil os trabalhos do Instituto Copenhagen de Estudos Futuros.
Exactly.
A partir de hoje, claro. Peter, in your mind, what's the role of the education in this construction of the future, and what are the main trends and changes that we can expect?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and that's a question that we are very concerned about, because one of the most important things for our future is the education. Is that we prepare people for the future. And when we look at the future, we can see that there's a high uncertainty. No one knows what is the skills demanded to be successful in the future. But what we do, we believe that our education system today needs to see a huge paradigm shift. It makes absolutely no sense the way we educate today. First of all, we have one huge block of education in the beginning of our life, and then today we just think, okay, we go and we learn some skills, and then we'll work with that for the rest of our life. It makes no sense, because the development is going so fast that we need all the time to update ourselves more and more and more. That we call a megatrend knowledge explosion. Right now, there's being accumulated and created so much knowledge that the knowledge that we acquire in formal education is being de-actualized very fast. So we believe in a concept that we call lifelong learning. So we need to see a change where education is not something you only do in the beginning of life, but something that you do throughout life. And another thing, we should not continue to educate for fixed skills. We should educate our young and also our old. We should educate in learning how to learn, what we call metacognition. So it's not so much what we learn in education, but it's about having professors and a system that can support and facilitate the development of each alumni's learning curve. You know? So it's not so much, it's not what we learn, but it's actually the ability to learn how to learn, so we can learn the rest of our lives. No?
Learn how to be more critical, learn critical thinking. But talking about trends, we see some confusing trends going on at the same time right now, which is, we just said here that we are producing huge amounts of information, technology, and knowledge this time. Technology itself is helping us in many ways. It also can feed the war, of course, with the whole warfare thing, but it can help us, can help in health, can help in our daily lives and everything. But at the same time, we see this trend growing on all over the world of people wanting to go back to a perfect past that really never existed, but which is the ultra-nationalism, the isolationism currents that we see here and there that can lead to extremism, to xenophobia, racism, fear of the different, of the other one. How can this sort of study protect us from the trap of these extremist views?
We have gone through, ever since World War II, the world has gone through a rather stable development in terms of an outroll of democracy. What we are seeing right now, unfortunately, is what you call it, a rollback of democratic values at overall. So studying the future and studying also the past, of course, and the link between the past and the future, can help us to see, are we going in some strange ways right now? Because we are learning right now, what our latest analysis show is that democracy is not a given. And right now we are seeing all this populist view because the world is moving fast. There is a lot of information and there's a lot of misinformation out there that makes people take crazy views. And we just did a study that shows that there's a rise between people that is beginning to believe that democracy is it's maybe not the best form of having society, that maybe it's better to have a strong leader. And that can be a concern for some, and for others it can be an advantage. But we need to understand this is actually happening, and then what do we want as society? What do we believe is the way forward? So we are standing in a very muddy water, we can say, in terms of what we in the Western liberal world has been taken for granted, suddenly is not being taken for granted anymore.
Peter, why is that Denmark and Scandinavia in general appear so frequently in the list of the happiest countries in the world? What does it mean? And why even Scandinavian companies, when they go all over the world, don't manage, for instance, to replicate what happens with so much success in Scandinavia?
Well, that's a very complex question, but a very good one. I always get asked this. I get asked this question a lot, and I always start by saying, but I really think it's linked to our past. It's linked to our history, our pride history with the Vikings, and especially our climate. Because why did Copenhagen Institute for Future Study happen in? Why did the Institute for Future Study happen in Denmark and not anywhere otherwhere? Where I think the short answer is that we had a lot of trouble because it was so cold. In Denmark, it's very easy,
and there was corruption as well.
And
there was corruption during
yes,
times.
Of course. But I think basically we have this one. We learned to plan very fast because where in our part of the world, if you didn't plan for the long winter, the winter came, you
die.
You had to have a warm house. You had to have clothes. You had to have a storage of food. So I think that is one of the pillars. And then we have had a successful development that has made that we have some very strong institutions today. And also because we were a small society, everybody knew each other. And we've been the same society for thousands of years. So everybody knew if someone is stealing a bike from someone, the whole city would know. And then they would punish that person. So it's also a very different format of society. And then go back to the Vikings, when they were going out exploring the world, when you were in that boat together, you needed to work together. You needed to trust. So that is why we somehow ended up creating some societies where people have a very high degree of trust to each other.
And the sense of collectiveness as well.
And collectiveness, and that is it's looked very badly upon if you lie, steal, because then you're not only making wrong to another person, but you're making wrong to the overall society. And this is maybe why I think this is some of the answers. But
and the difficulty is to take this model abroad.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. And also just to elaborate a little bit on you, because us getting here as an institute, we're based in Sao Paulo, it was very clear for me from the early on that we cannot just replicate everything we do in Denmark and do it in Brazil. We need to tropicalize it, because we always need to study. We study the same mega trend all over the world, but what is different is how they impact. So we always need to remember the context. And I think for many Danish companies and many Scandinavian companies, when you go outside of the world, you need to adapt to the environment you're in. Otherwise, maybe you won't be competitive.
And just to end our conversation here, there are plenty of projections of the future, very much catastrophic. We're going to be lacking water, there'll be no forests, there'll be wars because of water, because of climate, because of fuel and things like that, or the animals will be extinguished and everything. But at the same time, there are more optimistic views. And from what I've read from you, what I've heard from you, and our chat here, I see you as a more optimistic guy than a pessimistic one about the future. So what feeds your optimism, if we can call you an optimistic, about the future?
Well, you can call me an optimist about the future, but But when I'm doing the work as a future studies expert, of course we're not looking to see if the future will be great or bad. We try not to value it, because a future that is great for you and me might be very bad for a Chinese person. A future that is great for humankind might be very bad for the animals or for nature. No, so but as a person, as my personal opinion, I'm very optimistic about the future, and that is due to statistics. If you were born 150 years ago, you were having toothache since the day you were 2 till the day that you died around 40, 45 years old. Today, I never have toothache, or when I have toothache, I go to the dentist and they take care of it. And today I can expect to live 75, 80 years, maybe even more, and the children born today will live more. So pure statistic shows me that the future is a great sign in terms of if you like life, if you want to live, etc. But of course, when you look at the whole planet, it's not that, it's a more muddy picture, no? Good future for who, no? Because we have the, as you say, problem with climate change, problem with maybe some wars ahead. But overall, I always say this. The probability that anyone born in 2019 will have a great life is way bigger than the probability anyone born 100 years ago would have a good life.
And just really to end our conversation, is happiness a goal in your life? Should it be a goal in our lives?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that it should be a goal, but I don't think it's the meaning. For instance, because I don't think you won't be happy if you haven't tried to be really, really sad. So I think that actually to be happy is not the objective of life. The objective is to be in motion and to try to do things in a better way that will bring us happiness. But if we don't have resistance, if we don't have problems, then I believe it's very difficult to learn anything. We need to learn from the problems, and then maybe we will be happy sometimes, but I think that the goal of, I would be very, very unhappy if I just was born happy and was happy all of my life. That would be a crazy life. I think I would go crazy. No, I think, yeah, that's...
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you very much for having me here.